Okay, let's unpack this. Because, usually when we talk about armor, whether that's like a knight's plate mail from the Middle Ages or a modern military tank, there is this fundamental expectation of protection.
Right, the whole point is separation.
Exactly. The metal takes the hit so the flesh inside doesn't have to. It's a barrier. But then you step into the world of biomechanical storytelling, and suddenly that armor isn't a shield anymore.
No, not at all.
We're looking at a defensive weapon that doesn't just fail to protect you from pain, but actively, transmits that pain directly into your own nervous system.
It completely inverts the psychological safety net of the genre. I mean, the machine ceases to be a bunker and becomes something much closer to a shared nervous system. You aren't driving a vehicle, you are inhabiting a body that is actively suffering.
Which brings us to our deep dive today. Welcome, everyone. We are looking at a 26-episode television event that took that exact concept, the agonizing vulnerability of piloting a giant machine, and used it to completely rewrite the rules of Japanese sci-fi.
Yeah, we are talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion.
We are. And we're going to explore how its unparalleled approach to biomechanical world building and its, frankly, deeply fractured production history created a cultural earthquake.
A massive one.
And in a very strange twist, we'll be dissecting a really fascinating analysis of how this famously complex, borderline traumatic narrative serves as an incredibly rewarding tool for you, especially if you're an English learner.
What's fascinating here is to understand why a television show from 1995 is still being analyzed as, a linguistic tool and a psychological text today. You really have to look past the giant robots.
Right. It's not just a cartoon.
Exactly. Evangelion didn't just entertain. It essentially resuscitated the Japanese animation industry during a severe artistic and financial slump. I mean, it generated billions of dollars.
Billions with a B.
Yeah, billions. But beneath that massive merchandising empire, it is an astonishingly raw, uncomfortable mirror for clinical depression, economic despair, and just, the fundamental alienation of being human.
So, if we are dealing with a story that uses giant robots as a sort of Trojan horse for an exploration of clinical depression, I feel like we need to understand the mechanics of that world first.
For sure. The setting is key.
Because from what I'm seeing in our sources, the setting itself is a pressure cooker. It's literally designed to break the human mind. The year is 2015, but it's a post-apocalyptic version of 2015.
Right, because of the second impact.
Yeah, this event 15 years prior that wiped out half the human population. The oceans run red, the climate is devastated, and humanity is huddled in these heavily fortified, militarized urban centers. Specifically Tokyo 3.
And Tokyo 3 is, it's less of a city and more of a mechanized survival bunker. The architecture itself is paranoid.
Oh, totally.
Like when the sirens go off, the skyscrapers literally retract underground on these massive hydraulic pistons. The civilian populace is just constantly bracing for an attack from these entities known as the angels.
Okay, let's talk about these angels.
Yeah.
Because the name implies, halos and harps, right?
Yeah, very angelic.
But the visual reality is pure Lovecraftian horror, just overlaid with heavy Judeo-Christian iconography. The lore suggests their arrival was foretold in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they aren't uniform at all.
No, they're all bizarrely different.
Right. The first one we see, Sakil, is this hulking amphibious nightmare with an impassive Plague Doctor-style mask for a face.
It's terrifying.
And another one, Romil, is just a massive floating geometric blue octahedron that just hovers silently before firing a devastating particle beam. What exactly are these things, and why is conventional military hardware completely useless against them?
Well, the defining defensive characteristic of an angel is its absolute terror field, which is usually abbreviated as an AT field.
Okay.
On a purely tactical level, it acts as an impenetrable kinetic and energy barrier. You can drop an N2 mine, which is essentially a non-radioactive nuclear weapon, directly on an angel, and the AT field will simply deflect the blast.
It just brushes it off.
Exactly. But the genius of Evangelion is that the sci-fi mechanics are never just sci-fi mechanics.
Yeah.
The AT field is later revealed to be something much more profound. It isn't just a force field, it is the literal light of the soul.
Wait, really?
Yes, it is the psychological wall of the ego that separates one entity from another.
Wait. So the energy shield protecting the monster is literally the psychological barrier of its own self-identity.
Precisely. The show is built entirely around Arthur Schopenhauer's concept of the hedgehog's dilemma.
Oh, the hedgehogs in winter.
Right, the idea that human beings are like hedgehogs in the winter. We want to get close to each other for warmth, but the closer we get, the more we prick each other with our spines.
Ouch.
Yeah. The AT field is the ultimate manifestation of those spines. It is the terror of losing oneself in the presence of another. So, to physically pierce an angel's AT field, you need a weapon that operates on that same spiritual and psychological frequency.
Which leads humanity to develop the Evangelions. And this goes back to my initial problem with the armor.
Yes, the biomechanics.
If a traditional mecha is a walking tank, the Evangelion is something entirely different. The pilot doesn't just pull levers. They sit in an entry plug, which is this cylindrical capsule inserted directly into the spine of the Evangelion.
Which is already deeply unsettling.
Very. And then the capsule fills with this breathable, oxygenated liquid called LCL, which smells like blood and acts as a neural bridge. So the pilot's mind is synced directly to the machine.
The complete neural link.
But from an engineering standpoint, this seems like a fatal design flaw. If the robot's arm is severed by an angel, the pilot feels their own arm being ripped off. The phantom pain is absolute. Why would a military organization build their ultimate weapon in a way that guarantees the operator will suffer excruciating, debilitating agony?
You're hitting on the core horror of the series right there. They didn't design it that way out of a desire for cruelty. They designed it that way because it is the only way the machine functions.
What do you mean?
The Evangelions are not robots. They are biological, organic beings encased in metallic cybernetic armor. The historical and literary parallels here are fascinating. They function very much like the golem of Jewish folklore.
Oh, the clay statues brought to life.
Right, a massive anthropomorphic entity constructed from raw matter to protect the community, but one that is inherently volatile and terrifying. Visually, underneath the armor, they resemble the Oni, the demons of Japanese myth, complete with teeth, blood, and muscle tissue.
Okay, so the armor we see, like that iconic purple and green plating on Unit 01, isn't actually armor at all.
No, not really. The armor is a restraint system.
A restraint system.
Yes, it's a series of physical straitjackets and control mechanisms applied to a cloned, godlike biological entity to force it to obey human commands.
That is horrifying.
It is. The human organization running this, NRV, isn't piloting a robot. They're trying to steer a chained apocalyptic beast using a traumatized teenager as a biological spark plug.
And we see the absolute catastrophic failure of this system in the very first battle. I mean, Shinji Ikari, a 14-year-old boy with zero training, is essentially blackmailed into piloting Unit 01 against the Angel Psycheal.
Yeah, he has no idea what he's doing.
He naturally fails. The Angel grabs the Eva and drives a spike of energy directly through its head. And because of the neural synchronization, Shinji doesn't just see a, system failure prompt on a screen.
No, he feels the whole thing.
He suffers catastrophic, simulated cranial trauma. His brain registers the physical destruction of his own skull. He screams in agony and loses consciousness. But the fight doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't. And this is the moment the genre gets deconstructed in real time. The power is cut, Shinji is unconscious, the machine should be dead.
Right, it's out of battery.
Instead, Unit 01 reactivates. It enters what the show calls a berserk state. It rejects the human control systems. It hunches over, moves with this terrifying feral agility, and literally tears the angel limb from limb with its bare hands.
It's like an animal.
It howls like a wild animal. The audience realizes they aren't watching a triumph of human engineering. They are watching two eldritch abominations butcher each other in the ruins of a city.
It's pure apocalyptic horror, which raises an immediate, glaring question about the human element. If the Evangelion units are these terrifying, volatile mirrors that transmit pure agony directly into the pilot's brain, you cannot put a stable, well-adjusted soldier in that seat.
Absolutely not. A rational mind would reject the trauma immediately.
Right. So who does NRV put in these machines?
They exclusively use 14-year-old children who are deeply, fundamentally broken. The psychological profiling is where the creator, Hideaki Anno, poured his own internal struggles into the text.
And these kids are not your standard anime heroes.
Not at all. The characters are completely devoid of the traditional hero archetype. They are studies in severe trauma. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Anno designed characters based on Freudian and Jungian concepts.
Let's unpack these psychological profiles. You have Shinji Ikari. He's the protagonist, but he spends most of the series intensely avoiding action.
Yeah, he really doesn't want to be there.
He was abandoned by his father, Gendo Ikari, who happens to be the ruthless, Machiavellian director of NRV. Gendo only summons Shinji to Tokyo 3 because he needs a pilot. He views his son entirely as a utility.
Which just destroys Shinji's self-esteem.
Exactly. Shinji internalizes this rejection as a total lack of self-worth. His famous mantra in the cockpit is, "I mustn't run away." But he isn't saying that to muster bravery, is he?
No, he's saying it because the fear of his father's disapproval is marginally stronger than the fear of a giant alien ripping him apart. Shinji is the embodiment of the libido-destrudo conflict.
A what conflict?
Libido and destrudo. In Freudian psychoanalysis, the libido is the drive for life, connection, and creation. Destrudo is the opposing force, the death drive.
Oh, I see.
It's the psychological urge towards self-destruction, isolation, and returning to a state of absolute nothingness. Shinji is constantly oscillating between the desperate, libidinous desire to be loved by others and the overwhelming, destrudo-driven urge to curl up, shut the world out, and cease to exist so he can't be hurt anymore.
Wow. And as a foil to that internal collapse, you have Asuka Langley Soryu, the pilot of Unit 02. If Shinji implodes, Asuka explodes.
She is a force of nature.
She's a German, Japanese, American child prodigy with university degrees at 14. She is aggressive, hyper-competitive, and radiates an almost toxic level of self-confidence. But that confidence isn't real, is it?
No, it's a meticulously constructed fortress. Her psychological makeup is incredibly fragile.
Why is she like that?
Well, Asuka's backstory is rooted in an extreme trauma. As a very young child, her mother went insane after an experiment with an Evangelion unit and eventually committed suicide. Little Asuka discovered the body.
Oh my God.
Yeah. From that moment on, she developed a defense mechanism built entirely on exceptionalism. She decided she would never cry, never need anyone, and never be vulnerable.
So she has to be the best.
Her entire sense of self, her entire justification for taking up space in the world is contingent on being the absolute best EVA pilot. If her sync ratio drops, if she is outperformed by Shinji, her ego doesn't just take a hit. Her psychological foundation collapses entirely.
Then you throw in the third pilot, Rei Ayanami. She pilots Unit 00. She is the opposite of Asuka's fire. She is icy, distant, and seemingly devoid of emotion.
She's very unsettling to watch.
But she isn't just socially withdrawn. She is an anomaly. The lore reveals that Rei is actually a clone, engineered using the salvaged DNA of Shinji's deceased mother, Yui Ikari, combined with the soul of the second angel.
Which is a lot to process. Rei represents a completely different kind of existential terror. She lacks a basic survival instinct because she knows she is expendable.
Right, because there are backups.
Exactly. Deep in the subterranean levels of NRV, there is literally a massive tank filled with soulless biological copies of her body. If she is killed in combat, her consciousness is simply downloaded into the next vessel.
That's so grim.
Because she knows her life is finite and easily replaced, she struggles to understand human connection, emotional warmth, or even why she should care about her own physical pain. She is the uncanny valley given human form.
And the adults in the room aren't much better. You have Masato Katsuragi, the commanding officer who directs these kids in battle. On the bridge of NRV, she's a brilliant, decisive military tactician.
Very put together.
But then she brings Shinji to live in her apartment, and we see her private life is an absolute disaster. She's a functional alcoholic who survives on instant ramen and beer, living in squalor.
Yeah, her apartment is a mess.
She's using her chaotic, carefree home life as a mask to repress her own severe PTSD from surviving the second impact as a child.
Misato is fascinating because she acts as a surrogate mother to Shinji, but she's completely ill-equipped for the role. She's suffering from her own Electra complex, having a deeply complicated, unresolved relationship with her own father, who sacrificed his life to save hers during the cataclysm.
So no one is okay.
No one. Every single character in this command structure is using their duties at NRRV to avoid dealing with their own crushing psychological baggage.
Which brings us to the meta context. Why did the creator, Hideaki Anno, design a cast this damaged? The history here is vital. Before Evangelion, Anno had been working on a sequel project called Uru in Blue, which collapsed.
It completely fell apart.
And the failure of that project, combined with extreme creative burnout, sent Anno into a debilitating 4-year bout of clinical depression.
4 years of complete creative paralysis. When he finally emerged from it, he decided he could no longer make traditional escapist anime. He stated that his goal with Evangelion was to burn his own raw, unfiltered psychological state onto the celluloid.
He just poured it all in.
He literally took the concepts he was reading in psychoanalytic literature during his recovery and built characters out of them. He admitted that Shinji is a direct reflection of his own conscious struggle with responsibility. Rei is a manifestation of his deepest, most detached unconscious. The show is quite literally a televised therapy session masquerading as a sci-fi blockbuster.
which feels like a massive gamble. The cultural backdrop of the 1990s in Japan is really important here. Japan was entering what economists call the lost decade.
Right, the economic bubble burst.
The massive euphoric economic bubble of the 1980s was gone. You had an entire generation of youth stepping into a society that suddenly offered no guarantees of employment, no clear future, and an intense feeling of cultural stagnation. Usually in times of economic depression, audiences want pure escapism.
They want things to feel good.
They want Superman. They want a hero to fix things. Why did audiences latch onto a protagonist who hates himself and spends half the time curled in a fetal position?
Because it was authentic. Escapism only works when you still have hope that the real world will get better. When that hope is gone, escapism feels like a lie.
Oh, that's a great point.
Anno offered a mirror instead of a window. He acknowledged the collective anxiety of the Japanese youth. He looked at the otaku culture, fans who obsessively consumed anime and manga as a way to hide from society, and he put a mirror directly in front of them.
He called them out.
He did. He was essentially saying, I see why you are hiding because I am hiding too. But this machinery of escapism is not going to save you.
That profound level of psychological confrontation is what set the stage for the most infamous narrative pivot in television history. We have the characters established, we have the monsters at the gates, and then for the first 15 episodes, the show actually plays by the rules it established.
Yeah, it's surprisingly normal at first.
It's a Monster of the Week format. An angel attacks, the kids get in the robots, they suffer trauma, they win, they go home. But then we hit episode 16, Splitting of the Breast, and the entire 26-episode structure physically and narratively fractures.
Episode 16 is where the physical reality of the show begins to break down. Shinji is absorbed by an angel that is essentially a floating, multi-dimensional shadow called a Sea of Dirac.
Which is just a wild concept.
It's bizarre. He is trapped inside the shadow for hours, oxygen running low, and the narrative completely abandons the outside rescue effort to focus entirely on an abstract, deeply surreal internal dialogue Shinji has with himself.
Just talking to himself in the dark.
Right. And from that point forward, the external plot of saving the world is slowly cannibalized by the internal plot of exploring the characters' fractured psyches.
And what's wild is that this massive structural shift wasn't entirely a planned artistic vision from day one. It was the result of a perfect storm of real-world production chaos and unspeakable tragedy. Let's talk about the production nightmare at the studio, Gainax.
Gainax was a unique studio. It was founded by fans, by otaku, rather than corporate executives. They were incredibly passionate, but notoriously terrible at schedule and budget management.
Not a great combination for television.
Not at all. By the middle of the Evangelion run, they were completely out of time and money. They were forced to outsource massive chunks of animation to Tatsunoko Production. They were writing, drawing, and editing episodes just days before they aired on national television. The pressure was immense.
But it wasn't just a budget crisis. There was a catastrophic cultural event that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the script. In March 1995, just months before the show was set to air, the Anno Shinrikyo doomsday cult carried out a coordinated domestic terrorist attack.
The subway sarin attack.
Yes. They released deadly sarin gas on 5 trains in the Tokyo subway system during rush hour. It killed 13 people and injured thousands. It was a massive trauma for the Japanese public. They realized the apocalyptic threat wasn't a foreign military or an alien invasion. It was their own neighbors, deeply alienated from society, radicalized into a death cult.
The psychological impact of Aum Shinrikyo on Japan cannot be overstated, and it hit Anno particularly hard.
Why is that?
Well, the original outline for Evangelion featured a much more tangible apocalyptic narrative involving ancient conspiracies and a massive final battle against 28 angels. But after the subway attack, Anno felt that his fictional apocalypse mirrored the real-world terrorism too closely.
Oh, wow. It was too real.
Exactly. He feared both censorship from the television networks and, frankly, the moral irresponsibility of airing a story about apocalyptic cults trying to bring about the end of the world right after a real-world cult had just attempted the exact same thing in his city.
So he literally rewrites this show on the fly. The number of angels is slashed from 28 to 17, the plot gets increasingly claustrophobic, and this all culminates in the most controversial ending in anime history. Episodes 25 and 26.
The infamous finale.
The budget is gone. The schedule is dead. The original script for the finale is entirely abandoned. How does Anno end the show?
By turning the camera completely inward. The final 2 episodes take place entirely within the minds of the characters.
Like, entirely.
Completely. The physical apocalypse, the third impact, happens entirely off-screen or is just ignored. What we see instead is the human instrumentality project being triggered.
And what is that?
It's this forced evolutionary event orchestrated by Gendo Ikari, designed to dissolve all AT fields. And remember, those are the psychological walls between humans.
Right, the hedgehog spines.
Exactly. The goal is to melt all of humanity down into a single primordial soup of consciousness, eliminating the pain of loneliness forever.
And visually, it is stunningly avant-garde out of pure necessity. The animation budget was gone, so they couldn't draw giant robots fighting. Instead, the screen is filled with rapidly flashing text, psychological buzzwords, simple line drawings, crayon sketches, real-world photographs of bicycles and power lines, and long, static shots with intense voiceover dialogue.
It's very experimental.
We essentially watch Shinji sit in a chair in an empty void, undergoing a brutal 45-minute interrogation by the disembodied voices of his friends and family. They strip away his defense mechanisms, they force him to confront his destrudo, his desire for death, and ultimately demand that he choose whether he wants to exist as an individual who will inevitably feel pain, or dissolve into the collective where there is no pain, but also no self.
It is a radical departure. You have a primetime audience tuning in to watch the ultimate giant robot battle, and instead they're forced to sit through a grueling, psychoanalytical deconstruction of self-worth.
Which is just wild for network TV.
Toshi Okada, a former Gainax producer, noted that while the budget was a factor, this ending was ultimately Anno's choice. He simply couldn't bring himself to write a traditional action climax. His own psychological journey took absolute precedence over narrative conventions.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Imagine sitting in your living room in 1996. You've invested 6 months of your life into this sprawling, geopolitical sci-fi mystery. You want to know what the Dead Sea Scrolls mean, what the giant white giant in the basement is, and if humanity survives.
You want answers.
And the show ends with a crayon drawing of Shinji realizing that his perception of reality is subjective, followed by the entire cast standing in a circle clapping and saying, "Congratulations." It is the ultimate subversion of viewer expectation. It shattered the audience.
And yet it is precisely this bizarre, intense, hyper-intellectual final product, this chaotic blend of high-concept sci-fi and deeply abstract psychoanalysis that brings us to the linguistic analysis we uncovered.
Yeah, the language learning aspect.
Because, as baffling as the production history is, modern language educators have discovered that Evangelion is an incredibly potent tool for advanced English comprehension.
When I first read that, I was highly skeptical. I mean, usually when you want to learn a language, you watch a light sitcom, watch a reality show, watch something where people are speaking at a conversational pace about mundane, relatable topics.
That's something easy to digest.
Right. Recommending a show deeply embedded in Kabbalistic mysticism, Freudian psychology, and apocalyptic horror seems like a recipe for confusing a language learner. Why does this work?
It works because it forces the learner to engage with 2 entirely different, highly specialized semantic domains simultaneously.
Okay, break that down for me.
On one hand, you have the hyper-technical language. You are constantly exposed to terminology regarding paramilitary chain of command, bioengineering, physics, and tactical deployment. Words like synchronization, deployment, tactical, autonomous.
So lots of jargon.
Tons of it. But on the other hand, because of the psychological turn the show takes, the dialogue shifts dramatically into deep emotional introspection. You hear characters debating existentialism, the nature of the ego, the fear of abandonment, and the complexities of human intimacy.
So you're getting a masterclass in both the vocabulary of a boardroom and the vocabulary of a therapist's office in the same 22-minute chunk. But the real secret weapon here isn't just the variety of the words, it's how the brain encodes them into memory. And this relies on the neuroscience of emotional anchoring.
Exactly. When you watch a sitcom to learn a language, the stakes are virtually non-existent. A character lost their keys or they went on a bad date. Your amygdala, the part of the brain that processes emotion and links it to memory, isn't really engaged.
You're just kind of passively watching.
Right. The vocabulary goes into short-term memory and often fades. But in Evangelion, the emotional stakes are life, death, and total psychological annihilation.
Think about the scene where Asuka is attacked by the angel Ariel. This angel doesn't use physical weapons. It stays in orbit and attacks her mind directly using a beam of light. It forces her brain to replay the trauma of discovering her mother's suicide over and over while she is trapped in the cockpit.
It's a brutal scene.
She is screaming, begging for it to stop, her entire psychological armor cracking in real time. Or Shinji, sobbing uncontrollably because he is so starved for affection, but so terrified of being manipulated.
When a language learner watches scenes of that intensity, their own sympathetic nervous system engages. They are feeling the tension, the horror, the profound sadness of the characters.
You can't help but feel it.
Exactly. When you learn the English word for abandonment or despair or worthless while watching a character literally fight for their sanity to avoid those feelings, the emotional gravity sears the vocabulary into your episodic memory. You don't just memorize the definition of the word, you internalize the weight of the word.
Which brings up a fascinating secondary challenge for language learners navigating this show, the translation controversy. Because depending on which version of Evangelion you watch in English, the emotional weight of those words fundamentally changes.
Localization and translation theory is a massive field, and Evangelion is one of its most famous case studies. Translating a language like Japanese, which relies heavily on context, ambiguity, and social hierarchy, into English, which demands much more direct subject-verb-object clarity, is incredibly difficult.
Let's look at the history. For decades, the definitive English version was the dub produced by a company called ADV Films in the late 1990s. They localized it heavily, meaning they adapted the dialogue to sound more natural to an American ear, sometimes adding colloquialisms or adjusting the tone to fit Western dramatic sensibilities.
Right, they made it sound like a 90s American cartoon in some ways.
But in 2019, Netflix acquired the global streaming rights. And they didn't just re-release the show, they commissioned a brand new translation by an in-house translator, Dan Kanemitsu, and recorded a completely new dub with new actors.
The intent of the Netflix translation was to be much more literal, sticking closer to the exact phrasing of the original Japanese script.
Which sounds like a good thing, right?
You would think so. And while the actual voice acting was widely praised, the translation choices ignited a massive controversy. Specifically regarding the relationship between Shinji and the final angel, Kaworu Nagisa, who takes the form of a teenage boy.
Kaworu is an incredibly pivotal character, even though he only appears in one episode of the original series. He represents the Jungian shadow to Shinji, but uniquely, a shadow that offers unconditional acceptance.
He's a very comforting presence for Shinji.
He is the first person in Shinji's entire life who simply says, "You are worthy of affection." Now, in the original Japanese, Kaworu uses the word suki when speaking to Shinji.
And suki is a fascinating word. Depending entirely on the context, the tone of voice, and the relationship between the speakers, it can mean anything from "I like you as a friend" to "I am deeply romantically in love with you."
Very ambiguous.
Yes. The original ADV dub translated this moment as Kaworu telling Shinji, "I love you." This established a strong, explicitly queer overtone to their relationship, which fans had embraced for over 2 decades.
But the new Netflix translation changed it. Dan Kanemitsu translated the line as "I like you," and changed other lines from "I was born to meet you" to "I think I was born to meet you." The fan base erupted.
They were not happy.
No, they accused Netflix of straight-washing the relationship, of deliberately sanitizing the queer subtext to make it more palatable or conventional. Kanemitsu defended the choice, arguing that he was trying to preserve the ambiguity of the Japanese word suki, leaving it up to the viewer to interpret the depth of the emotion, just as a Japanese viewer would.
It's a really tough spot for a translator.
On top of that, due to massive international licensing fees, Netflix had to completely remove the iconic ending theme song, Frank Sinatra's "Fly Me to the Moon," from all global broadcasts outside of Japan, replacing it with a piano instrumental.
For a student of linguistics or translation, this controversy is a goldmine for critical thinking. It demonstrates that translation is never an objective science. It is an act of interpretation.
Every word matters.
Changing a single word from love to like doesn't just change the sentence, it entirely shifts the emotional gravity of the scene, the characterization of Kaworu, and Shinji's ultimate tragic choice at the end of the episode. It teaches learners that to truly understand English or any language, you have to look beyond the dictionary definition and understand the cultural and emotional payload that a specific word carries.
It's incredible how a debate over a single pronoun or verb can reflect the immense passion this show generates. And that passion is exactly what fueled the cultural firestorm in Japan following the broadcast of those final 2 abstract episodes we talked about earlier. The reaction wasn't just a mild disappointment, it was a national event.
The backlash to the television ending was unprecedented. The audience felt profoundly betrayed. They had tuned in for narrative closure and were handed an existentialist art project.
They wanted the giant robot fight.
Exactly. The debate spilled out of anime magazines and into mainstream media. Major national newspapers like the Yomiuri Shimbun were publishing op-eds and letters from prominent cultural commentators arguing about the artistic merit of the finale. Gainax and Anno received thousands of letters.
Good letters or bad letters?
Both. Many were letters of profound gratitude from fans who felt seen in their depression, but others were literal death threats, covered in graffiti expressing pure rage.
And Anno's response to this rage was to take those death threats, photograph them, and actually flash them on screen in the subsequent cinematic conclusion. Because to appease the audience and perhaps to satisfy his own artistic demons, Gainax secured the funding to produce a feature film in 1997 titled The End of Evangelion.
The End of Evangelion is designed to be the real-world perspective of what was happening outside of Shinji's mind during those final 2 episodes.
So it fills in the blanks.
It provides the apocalyptic spectacle the audience demanded, but it delivers it in the most punishing, bleak, and terrifying way imaginable. It is a masterpiece of surrealist cinema, but it is deeply uncompromising. It didn't coddle the audience, it forced them to watch the literal destruction of humanity and the breaking of its characters.
It was a massive critical and commercial success, and the release of that film locked Evangelion into the cultural bedrock of Japan. But this brings us to what I find to be the most baffling paradox of the entire franchise.
The merchandising.
Yes, the core message of Evangelion, explicitly stated by Anno, is a harsh critique of the otaku lifestyle. It is a plea to the audience to stop using anime, merchandise, and fantasy as a shield against the pain of real human interaction. He is literally saying, go outside, talk to people, face reality. So how in the world did this specific show become one of the most lucrative merchandising empires in the history of global entertainment?
It is the ultimate irony of consumerism. Inanno created a mirror to show the audience their own dysfunction, and the audience looked at the mirror and said, "This is a beautiful mirror. I would like to buy a plastic replica of it."
That's perfectly put.
The financial data is staggering. Within just 2 years of the original broadcast, the franchise generated over $400 million in merchandise. By 2007, total sales of related goods were estimated at over 150 billion yen. They monetized the alienation.
You look at the character of Rei Ayanami. She is a tragic figure, a cloned tool denied a soul, representing the terrifying void of human detachment. Yet she became the single most heavily merchandised female character in anime history. The publishing industry dubbed her the premium girl.
Because she guaranteed sales.
If a magazine put Rei on the cover, regardless of the magazine's content, the issue would instantly sell out. Fans were obsessively collecting figurines of a character whose entire narrative purpose was to criticize the obsessive collection of fictional girls.
And the merchandising extended far beyond toys and DVDs. There was official Evangelion coffees, smartphones, high-end fashion lines, themed bullet trains, and airplane wraps.
Bullet train.
Yeah. But the most lucrative and perhaps the most cynical expansion of the brand was into the gambling sector. By 2015, over 2 million Evangelion-themed pachinko and pacha slot machines had been sold across Japan.
2 million.
2 million. These machines alone generated roughly 700 billion yen in revenue. A deeply personal art project about clinical depression and the crushing weight of human existence became the flashing, noisy mascot of the Japanese arcade gambling industry.
It's a testament to the sheer power of the aesthetic. Even if people ignored the psychological lecture, the visual design, the biomechanical EVAs, the stark typography, the apocalyptic color palette was so groundbreaking that it became a permanent fixture of pop culture, which sets the stage for the final act of this story, because Anno wasn't done. Decades after the original series and the movie, he returned to tell the story one last time.
Starting in 2007, Anno, now heading his own newly formed studio Kara, began releasing the rebuild of Evangelion Tetralogy, a series of 4 high-budget feature films. Initially, they were marketed to the public as a simple graphical update, a retelling of the original series with modern animation techniques and a more coherent plot.
The first film, Evangelion 1.0 You Are Not Alone, lulls the audience into a false sense of security. It hits the familiar narrative beats of the early television episodes, almost shot for shot.
Right, it feels very nostalgic.
But then the second film arrives, and the timeline begins to fracture. By the third film, the narrative has completely derailed from the original series. We are 14 years in the future, the world is ruined in a totally different way, new pilots are introduced, the Evangelions operate on entirely different metaphysical rules, and the audience is completely unmoored.
The rebuild project became a mirror for Anno's own ongoing journey. Just as the original series was plagued by production delays and Anno's depression, the rebuild films took 14 years to complete. Anno suffered another severe mental breakdown during the production of the final film.
He went through it again.
He did. But when he finally returned to finish it, his perspective had shifted. He was no longer the angry, depressed young man lashing out at the world and his audience. He was older, married, and had found a measure of peace.
And that profound personal shift is vividly reflected in the final film, Evangelion. 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time, released in 2021. It shattered box office records, becoming the highest-grossing film of Anno's entire career. But more importantly, it delivered something that the Evangelion franchise had explicitly denied its audience for 25 years, genuine, unironic hope.
The original series ended with Shinji accepting his own reality, but remaining trapped in a ruined world. The end of Evangelion ended with Shinji and Asuka alone on a blood-red beach in a state of absolute hostility.
Super bleak endings.
But Thrice Upon a Time concludes with the characters actually healing. Shinji finally makes the active, conscious choice to dismantle the Evangelions entirely. He rewrites the universe into one where the mechas don't exist, where the trauma isn't necessary. He grows up.
It's beautiful.
The final shots of the film transition from animation into real-world live-action footage of modern Japan, with Shinji as a well-adjusted adult running out of a train station into the real world.
It's an incredibly moving meta-narrative. Anno is finally giving the characters, the fans, and himself permission to let the franchise go. He's saying, we survived the Depression, now it's time to live in reality. It is profound, definitive closure to a saga that defined a generation.
It really is.
So, to synthesize everything we have unpacked today, we have explored how a 26-episode television show, born from the depths of clinical depression, managed to completely dismantle and rebuild the Japanese mecha genre. It took the comforting trope of the giant robot and turned it into a biomechanical nightmare that forced the audience to confront their own psychological trauma.
A true genre deconstruction.
We've seen how its chaotic production history resulted in an avant-garde masterpiece that spawned a multi-billion-dollar empire of irony. And we've uncovered how the show's unique fusion of hyper-technical sci-fi jargon and raw, agonizing emotional vulnerability makes it an unparalleled high-stakes training ground for advanced English language learners looking to master the nuances of translation and semantic gravity.
It is a singular piece of media. It completely refuses to be passively consumed. It demands intellectual, emotional, and psychological engagement from anyone who watches it.
It really does. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over, circling back to that very first analogy about the armor.
We established that the Evangelion units were terrifying because they weren't machines, they were biomechanical mirrors. They physically manifested the pilot's deepest traumas, insecurities, and the darkest parts of the human condition, transmitting that pain directly back into their minds. It makes you wonder if humanity in our current era of global anxiety and isolation were to build a mecha today to face our own existential crises. What dark, repressed parts of our collective psyche would that machine reflect? And knowing exactly what it takes to sync with it, knowing the agonizing emotional truth it would force you to feel, would you be brave enough to get in the robot?